Okay, so today we are talking multi-perspective books. That is, books that have more than one perspective. So let's start off with a definition. So a singular perspective book is a book that follows the perspective of one character and no more. A great example of this could be the Harry Potter series. While we do get to experience some of the things that Harry's friends Ron and Hermione do, we are following this world through the eyes of one specific character, and that is Harry Potter. Another clue to this is that each perspective that you will follow in a book will give you the internal monologues and the internal thoughts and goings on of that character. So if you are only able to access one character's internal thoughts and feelings, then it is a singular perspective book. However, if you are able to access more than one character's internal thoughts, feelings, and goings on, then that is a clue that you are at least reading a book that contains more than one perspective. So the next category on the multi-perspective journey is dual perspective. Dual being two. So again, using the same definition that we have for singular, if you are able to access the internal thoughts, feelings, and goings on of two characters, this is known as dual perspective. And I'm going to give you two examples of dual perspective that are completely different. First of all, Letters to the Lost by Bridget. This is a YA contemporary book that follows the perspective of two different characters. We have Juliet and Declan. With this book, it follows a very common dual perspective writing style in that we alternate chapters between perspectives and characters. So, for example, chapter 1 might be called Juliet, chapter 2 could be called Declan, and so on and so forth. So in the odd chapters, we have the perspective of Julia. We see things through her eyes. We feel things from her perspective. We get the internal thoughts, feelings, and goings on of Juliet. Then in every second chapter, we get to see things through Declan's eyes. We don't see anyone else's perspective unless they are externally making that point. My second example I want to give you is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This is a psychological fiction. This book is dual perspective, but not for the same reason as Letters to the Lost. It deals with two separate moments in time. It is what we call then and now. Every first chapter that we deal with, we're dealing with our main character as she was in the past. And then every second chapter, we're dealing with her as she is in present day. So dual perspective does not necessarily have to be just perspective of characters, but it can also be perspective of different times. And the third and final category in this multi-perspective world is that title, multi-perspective books. So obviously we have the singular perspective, then the dual perspective, but if you have 3 or more different perspectives, that's when it becomes multi-perspective. An example of this is The Stranger Diaries by Griffiths. This is an adult mystery that follows the perspective of 4 separate characters. In the case of The Stranger Diaries, the multi-perspective is of different personal perspectives of the characters rather than timelines or anything else. But that is your difference right there. Number 1, singular perspective, e.g. Harry Potter. Number 2, dual perspective. It could be 2 different people, and I gave the example Letters to the Lost. Also in dual perspective, I gave the example of My Dark Vanessa, then and now, so we can deal with time. Or multi-perspective, like the example of The Stranger Diaries by Griffiths, where we have 3 or more, in that case 4, different perspectives that we get to witness. Again, the majority of the time when it comes to figuring out if your book is single, dual, or multi-perspective, the best way to work this out is how many characters do you get to see the internal stuff that goes on. Their thoughts, their hidden feelings. If you're only getting that from one character, e.g. Harry Potter, it's a singular perspective, no matter how many characters your book has. If we only get the internal perspective of one character, it's singular perspective. 2 dual perspective, 3, multi-perspective. So, moving on to the second part of this video, I'm going to give you my thoughts and my opinions on singular, dual, and multi-perspective when it comes to reading books. These are my own subjective, personal opinions. When it comes to the singular perspective, I think this is the easiest perspective to read because we're really only needing to deal with the inner workings and goings on of one character. So Harry Potter to me is a breeze to read through when it comes to the singular perspective book. Dual perspective isn't so bad. I think it just takes a little while to get your characters down pat. So when you have a singular perspective, it could take anywhere from 1 to 4 chapters, depending upon many different factors, genre, age range, all those sorts of things, to really get a feel for the character that we are following. With a dual perspective, because you have the characters alternating with chapters and perspectives, it takes double the amount of time. So it could take you up until chapter 7 to get to know one character, or chapter 8 to get to know the second character. So this makes things a little more tough to follow. And I would say, as far as if you're looking for easier books to read, stick with single perspective. Medium level of books to read would be dual perspective. As for the then and now dual perspective, this one is easier to grasp, I feel, than your dual perspective of 2 different characters. Once you get used to that writing style, if you're not used to the writing style, it might take you a while. And a lot of the time, and this is an overall tip for all of the different types of perspective books that you can pick up, a lot of the time you're going to go into this book not knowing what number of perspectives you're going to have in that book. Now, you may come across a booktuber who's reviewing a book, and this booktuber might say, this is a singular perspective. Well, they wouldn't say that. That's something else to keep in mind. If the book is a singular perspective, it's not going to be referred to as such, because it's just going to be taken for granted that it is. But if the booktuber says to you, this is a dual perspective book following 2 characters, then you've got that heads up. Or this is a multi-perspective book that follows many different characters, you'll have that heads up. But if you don't have that heads up, you're going to go into this book falling in love with one character in chapter 1 and then moving over to another character in chapter 2, and it can get a bit mind-boggling, so it can take some getting used to. This is where I would recommend the then and now trope for dual perspective first, and so that you can see if you can wrap your head around reading alternate chapters where you go from history to present day to history to present day. If you feel you can handle that, then you may very well be able to handle dual perspective of different characters. Another example of dual perspective is History Is All You Left Me by Adam Silvera. This book is an LGBTIQ plus book that follows 2 guys who are, it's a contemporary, so they're going through a very tough situation, deals with a very tough subject matter. I don't want to give away spoilers. And so if that's more your style, something that intrigues you, pick up that book. As for multi-perspective books, I think these are the most challenging to read for reasons that I've already stated. The fact that by the time you've gotten a grasp on one character, you're then being forced to follow a completely different character that you either don't already know, or what you do know comes from what you've learned from the one character that you've been following this whole time. And it can be incredibly annoying to now have to juggle a second character, but then on top of that, you then have to juggle a third character, or then a fourth, a fifth, a sixth. It can get very overwhelming. So I would definitely recommend, if you have the advantage of knowing before you go in, to start off with a dual perspective book before moving into a multi-perspective book. Now, I didn't have this luxury because most of the either dual or multi-perspective books that I've read, I did not know that they were going in. I did know this about History Is All You Left Me, but I had already read Letters to the Lost before History Is All You Left Me, so I was used to the dual perspective writing style. But these are just all these different tips that you should keep in mind. As someone who has written a number of books that I have put up on amateur websites, I have written books that are multi-perspective, but they're not written in the usual multi-perspective format. I write books from the perspective of what we call an omniscient narrator. That is someone who can just pop into the head of anyone at any given time. There's no set standard format of this chapter we're focusing just on this one and this one on this one, or we're only having 2 or we're only having 3. I've had books where we are following 10 characters and at any given time I can pop into one character's head and then pop right into the other character's head that's down the street. To me, I love writing this because it does give me that opportunity to keep things fresh, but it also is a great convenience for me. If I have Mark walking down the street who's not really doing much, but I have Lindsay across the road who's going through a crisis, I can jump right into her head and not have to worry about waiting until the next chapter or other things that standard multi-perspective books would usually do. This is a very well accepted writing style, the omniscient narrator style, and if it is something of interest to you and you are a writer, I would highly recommend looking it up. As to the note of you can lose the reader if they like one character's perspective but not another, I can completely concur with this. So earlier I was showing you guys the Stranger Diaries by Griffiths, and with the first 7 chapters with that first perspective, I was really getting to know this first character. By the time I got to chapter 7, I had gone from I don't know you to I'm trying to get to know you to now I actually really like you as a character, and it felt like a real betrayal to then be kicked out of their head and forced into someone else's. So I think if you are going to do it, you need to find a way to do it that readers will be comfortable reading. If this is the first time that you're attempting this, I would either recommend going down the omniscient narrator way, or to try and keep your multi-perspective book with as few perspectives as possible. Try and go 3, because the more POVs, points of views that you have, the tougher it's going to be for the average reader to read, which will limit your audience with reading this wonderful book that you've created. With one of the series that I was writing, again using that omniscient narrator writing style, I was writing a series, and so to be able to reveal certain things through the eyes of a victim or through the eyes of someone who's trying to solve the mystery, as opposed to through the eyes of the whodunit person, does make a very big difference. So if you're going to write multi-perspective or dual perspective books in a way that's not from an omniscient narrator, stick to what is the standard format, which is alternate chapters. The way that Griffiths did it by doing 7 chapters for one and then 7 for another, it was really hard to feel anything for any of these characters, because by the time you grow to love them, you're shoved over to someone else. I think the pros, for me personally, outweigh the cons in that if you keep it to one perspective, it just makes it so much easier to follow. Also, it makes the plot a lot easier to follow, because if you're bouncing around from one head to another to another to another, you could be distracted from the plot because of all this bouncing. You have those moments where you're like, I just like this one character and the rest is just really boring, so I'm waiting for my character's perspective to come back around. You do limit yourself if you're writing a multi-perspective. You kind of create a niche market with your book, because only people who enjoy or appreciate multi-perspective are going to really love and appreciate your works. As a good friend of mine who is an editor once said, if there's no reason to having that there, then why is it there in the first place? And it may sound harsh, but it's true. You can bore your readers very easily through a creative choice that you've made because you think it's different and it's going to make you stand out, but what you can't predict is your readers' reactions, and multi-perspectives can definitely turn readers off from wanting to read your book, especially if they're used to the really popular series, say Harry Potter, Vampire Academy, even the Selection series. All of these really well-known YA series are done through singular perspectives. So it's also not just because they're popular, but readers grow up with the singular perspective writing style. So it is extremely different, and it's a much riskier thing to attempt to write a multi-perspective. Again, as I've been saying consistently throughout this video, you're creating a niche when you do that. So I think we will leave that there. And thank you so much for watching, letting you guys go with peace, blessings, and so much love. I post videos every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday, and I'll see you again soon. Mwah! Happy reading! Bye guys, bye!